Time for the Daily Planet podcast show. Sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Kryptonian Collection, the monthly show where a venerated Council of El will gather to discuss, argue, and finally vote on whether a movie should be granted entrance into the illustrious Kryptonian Collection, a list of the greatest films our meager little planet has to offer. My name is Scott Daly, your host and a permanent member of the Council, and joining me today is my co-host and fellow permanent Council member, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. I'm excited for yet another installment of the Kryptonian Collection, and why don't you tell us who's going to be joining us and what we're going to be doing?
I will. Joining us today is our new rotating member of the Council after his movie Videodrome got in last month. Actually, that's technically 2 months ago because we didn't do one of these in November, but that's okay. It's Shannon Hubble. Shannon, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you back. Really interested in your input for this month because I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation about an interesting movie. But we'll get to that in a sec. First, Matt, why don't you just quickly go over the rules of the Kryptonian Collection for anyone who has never listened to this before?
Sure, Scott. The rules of the Kryptonian Collection are, as always, pretty simple. Each month, a challenger will put forth his movie and an argument for including it. The Council and our challenger will then discuss the film in detail, including its merits and its flaws. Once this discussion is complete, a vote will be taken, and each of the 3 members of the Council will get 1 vote. And if the film receives at least 2 yes votes, then it is entered into the collection. At this point, the challenger would also be awarded with the 3rd seat on the Council, taking Shannon's place. The challenger would then join us next month and get a deciding vote in that month's film. If, however, the film does not get the required 2 votes, it is rejected and forever banned from consideration. The challenger, of course, is welcome to come back in a few months' time and put forth a different film for consideration. And speaking of that challenger, who do we have on deck this month, Scott?
We have Paul Acevedo, no relation to former Council member Chad. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Scott. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. And what film have you brought before us this month?
Today I propose Audition, made in 1999 by Takashi Miike.
So why don't you go through, if you could just do like a quick high-level summary of what Audition is, and then talk to us about why you think this is a worthy film.
Oh, wow. Well,
I asked the tough questions here on the Kryptonian Collection.
Yeah, well, I should at least be able to handle this. Let's see, it is sort of a romantic drama / horror thriller, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And also, I think we should point out that the movie has kind of a twist, and so that, any kind of discussion of the movie must necessarily spoil the twist, I think. So, if you haven't seen it, it's always a good idea to maybe watch the movie before listening to people talk about it. But hopefully...
I normally recommend listening to or watching the movies before all of these, but this one especially, because I think this movie works best when you go in kind of completely cold.
Yeah, and I guess hopefully we'll find out who was cold and who wasn't. Anyway, the movie centers around a man named Aoyama. It's a Japanese movie, of course. He is he's a producer of documentaries, and early in the movie we discover that he is a widower. He has a teenage son, Shige, who encourages him to look for a new wife. It's been 7 years since his wife died. And so he talks to his best friend, who is also in entertainment, and they decide to basically put together a movie. They're going to hold an audition to find a woman with just the right qualities that Aoyama is looking for. And so it's like they're going to both cast a movie and hopefully find a woman that he will be able to fall in love with at the same time. And so you go through that process, and he does find a woman named Asami. And so we go through their courtship, and eventually it takes a darker turn towards the end of the movie.
Yeah,
So
very dark.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
So I guess now I should suggest why I think it belongs in the club.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see. I don't think if you're a Japanophile like me, then you might have discovered that Japanese movies tend to. I think it's not unfair to say that a lot of them are really bad, or like a lot of the ones that get brought to English markets are really bad. They tend to be like splatter movies and just things that would kind of maybe appeal to an anime enthusiast, but wouldn't hold up as actual quality filmmaking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And this one comes from the director Miike. He's very prolific, and he just churns these movies out really quickly. And yet, I think it ended up being kind of a jewel, like one of his best-known movies, as a matter of fact. I think it is really well directed. Like, it's a movie that was made on the cheap, and in a period of only 3 weeks, which is pretty fast to make an enduring movie, at least. But there's a lot of beautiful cinematography, I think, or not all of it, but there's some really interesting shots that are quite deliberate and seem to, fit the mood of the movie really well.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, like we said, you got a dark thing going on at the end, but before that, leading up to the bad things that happen, the movie really, really takes its time in getting you to care about the characters, especially the protagonist, and then you care about Aoyama finding happiness, and you really hope that things are going to work out for him with Asami. And so, I don't know, not a lot of movies get you so invested in a relationship, especially like a horror movie. They don't tend to put so much work into the characters. This movie has really, really good character work and a nice, deliberate, slow pace, some good foreshadowing, because although, I think the twist will eventually hit you in the gut. Maybe you probably weren't expecting it to go so dark. Like maybe things aren't going to work out very well. But then it happens, and I don't know, it's really visceral, and I don't know, I just can't think of very many movies that have affected me on the same level as this one. And I think it has some interesting themes, and there's a lot of room for interpretation as well.
Yeah.
So that's my argument.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think we're going to go around the digital table next, and before we go into our back and forth discussion, I just wanted to get an idea from each one of our council members what they thought of the film. Shannon, why don't you go ahead and go first, since you're our special member. What did you think of the movie? Had you seen the film before? Just what was your interaction with it?
I had seen it before, but I had seen it when it first came out. I saw it in theaters, and that was a while ago. And I just had a very vague recollection of the basic premise. I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate, as you said, Paul, the way that it lets the story play out. It's very minimalist, and it takes its time. And so when things do go completely bonkers, you really feel that shift. I really dug what, in broad strokes, what it was doing with the themes of the gender dynamics and that sort of thing. I'm really curious to see how this conversation goes, because in the end, I'm not quite sure if what happens in that initial setup, like the bulk of the film, and when it goes completely dark and horrifying, I'm not sure that it quite ties together thematically in a way that works for me. So, but I'm also just not, even though I've said I've seen it once before, I think this is basically, I can view this as my first viewing. It's been so long, and I wish I'd had time to watch it at least one more time. I think maybe some things would have fallen into place better for me. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about that sort of thing.
Cool. Matt, how about you? I don't think you had seen this before, but what was your experience with the film?
No, I hadn't seen it. I was only vaguely familiar that there's a Japanese movie called Audition, and it's sort of a horrific nightmare movie that you never want to expose yourself to, and thus I never had. But I'm really glad that I watched it, and I really liked it. It really appealed to me on the thematic and subtextual level that we've hinted at. We haven't really gone into that. I suspect we will go into that in a bit, but just to outline that, I guess for the round of discussions, you've got basically this sort of implicitly patriarchal guy whose wife died, and he's like, well, I'm going to find a new wife, and I'm going to audition for a new wife. So it's this very unilateral power dynamic of the man is literally auditioning women to be his mate, and then of course the movie, it turns that in a way where it's you can argue about what the movie then goes on to say about what Asami is doing. But I really enjoyed the visuals. I really enjoyed the pacing and the characterization, and I really enjoyed the ending sequence. I don't even know what to define as the ending sequence because who knows when it starts. But basically, there's the whole end of the movie is you're repeatedly switching between what are either hallucinations or dreams, and you don't actually know which thread is the dream and which thread is real. Even at the very end, I'm not sure which thread is supposed to be the real thread, and I think that's obviously, well, I suspect that's intentional, and I suspect you're supposed to be left in this state of uncertainty. But we can talk about that too. Anyway, I love this movie, and I'm glad we watched it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had never seen this film. I knew nothing about it. I have never seen a Miike film before. I barely even knew this was a horror film. Really, the only clue I had to this being a horror film was when I went to rent it on Amazon. It's listed as being on Shudder, and I knew Shudder's a horror movie service. So I came in about as cold as you could get on this movie, and it worked so well on me. The two different halves of this movie, how they tie together, how they tie into the themes. I had so much fun, and I watched this last night, and I've been sitting on it for basically the past 24 hours thinking about it, and it's only really grown in my appreciation over that time. So I'm also very much looking forward to this conversation because I think, kind of like last month's film, there's a lot of interpretation here, and I think there's a lot of interesting conversation. So let's get right into it. So I want to talk, and I'm sure each of you has topics you want to bring up, but I specifically wanted to talk about what I really liked, which was the cinematography and how this movie was shot and how that relates to kind of the two halves of the film. I don't know if you guys noticed how differently the beginning of the movie was shot from the end. The beginning was shot with, very static cameras. The camera didn't move very much. It kind of just stood in place. And by the end, the camera is more handheld and moving all over the place and doing weird zooms and dollies and all this. And I felt that tied very much into how we're kind of moving from the male gaze in the beginning to a much different viewpoint by the end of the film.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when the movie started, and for the first half hour at least, I think I was thinking, I didn't realize this was like an older movie, and I eventually realized this isn't an older movie. It's being shot in a certain style, and then when it hits that switch point, it starts to be shot in what I think of as a more modern style. It's really just a different style. I don't know if you can say one is modern and one is not modern, but you're exactly right. It's very you feel the switch. You really do when it shifts into the horror. Thought that was extremely powerfully done.
Yeah, we talk about, especially here, we talk about how camera work ties into the themes of the film, and I thought, that's just jumped out of me. It was one of the big notes I wrote down while I was watching the movie. Is that different change in style of cinematography?
Would you say it becomes frenetic?
Yeah, that's probably the better word I should have just said instead of trying to describe it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it both fits Ayama's like mental state, as well as just showing things from a different perspective.
I think the first time that it really when it makes that shift before it fully moves into the actual horror climax, but when we see the bag in Asami's home move for the first time,
Yeah.
it goes from like the way the film had basically been shot up until that point. All of a sudden, I forget exactly what the angle is, but it cuts in as it moves. It's a kind of a smash cut, and it's a much more extreme angle, much more stylized, and it's jarring because of that. I thought that worked really, really well.
Yeah, and that ties in that because that's really the first indication that something is going on here that's weird. Because like you're kind of, I mean, you're built. The tension kind of ramps up expertly here, I think, because you guys are right. It starts off as a very standard. Like I thought. I mean, I was kind of waiting for when the horror element was going to hit, but I also was seeing just this love story, and it's and your preconceived notions of Japanese culture and how this love story was unfolding kind of plays into that. Is yes, this is a guy who's auditioning women for the role of his wife, but he seems generally entranced by this woman, and she seems at first to at least like him, and then you're kind of taken along for a ride on that, and then suddenly there's this feeling of unease that ramps up until that bag does that weird movement with that weird noise, and then suddenly you're like, oh, this is what we're doing.
And even then, so I think I did know that. I think I did know that there was a person in a bag. I think I did come in knowing that, just from like internet osmosis. But even then, you don't really know like what's up. You just know like, okay, that was a disturbing little second of footage there, and now I'm unsettled, and then it goes back to being normal for a while. Speaking of kind of ramping up the tension, I love his friend is actually there being kind of the voice of wisdom and being like, we don't know anything about this woman, and I couldn't contact any of her references, and one of her references is missing. And I'm just kind of worried about you, man. And I also like that our main character's reaction is just what I feel to be very realistic, where he's just like, no, I can handle it. I wasn't born yesterday, you know. And it's like you can totally imagine being in the situation where, you know, there's a psycho person in your life, and you're like, no, look, this can't happen to me. Okay, I'm smart. This kind of thing doesn't happen to me. And that's never true.
yeah, absolutely. So, again, back to I'm sorry, I'm harping on the cinematography a lot, but I just love it so much. The audition scene by itself, like again, the first half of this movie is shot very statically, and I don't say that as a bad thing. I think some of the compositions, even in that first half, are rather beautiful. But I love how the audition scene was set up, and I love like it puts in this music. Like the film, there's not much score to this movie, but it is used effectively in a few places, and during that whole audition scene is one of them. I love the image of the chair standing there as the blinds slowly move down, solid black blinds move down to cover.
Very ominous.
Yeah, it really was. But then it switches from that ominous move to this like. It's almost jovial as it goes through these women. It's like joking, comedic kind of, which again I think enforces some of the themes we're going to get into. Where even Oyama, who is kind of hesitant and reluctant to this whole process, like finds himself joking along in it and becoming part of it. I just think that whole part was just so effective, and it's so integral for the movie to work, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. They're basically playing, you know, the tonal equivalent of yakety sax while he's asking the women these extremely like rude and inappropriate questions, and so it creates an interesting kind of sensation in your mind.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's some little comedy bits there too. You know, like it's not just the music, but actual little bits of comedy, which is a nice thing to see in a movie like this.
Yeah, I think it.
One of the comedy bits in that is there's that one shot of the one woman who doesn't look like a model, and they just stare at her silently for a second, and you know, which plays as a joke obviously, but it also that kind of ties in with like, it kind of puts the audience in the same like ethical, moral position as they are, in this kind of judgmental way, which I thought was an interesting move.
Right. Yeah. Because you and the audience are like, oh, she's not attractive enough to be here. Oh, wait, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I also thought every interaction with his son was beautifully, lightly comedic and just makes you love them and their relationship, which of course is used against you later.
Yeah.
And also the son loves dinosaurs, and so do I, so that makes him awesome in my book.
I wrote that dinosaur thing down because I was really trying to figure out if that's going to play into the film somehow, because they seem to mention it multiple times, like, oh, they discovered a new form of dinosaur, and then I see this thing moving in a bag, and I was like, is there going to be some really weird shit that goes down in this movie? Yeah. So I guess we've kind of been dancing around the themes a little bit, and I think the most effective way to talk about this movie for the rest of the podcast is to just get into the themes and then see how that spreads out to the rest of the conversation. To me, this was an intensely feminist movie that specifically attacks the male-dominated Japanese culture and kind of turns it on its head. Like, it literally goes from male gaze to she takes the power in the second half of the film, and uses that to horrifying ends. But I read up on this, and that is not the interpretation that other people had. So I'm kind of interested in what you guys thought of the themes, and if you agree with my reading of the film, or if you have a completely different reading. So Paul, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I think the feminism angle is definitely there. There is one little argument against that, and that's that one of Asami's victims was actually a female cafe owner or a bar owner. So, like, they don't dwell on that very much, but he's just someone who had the bad luck of coming across her, also a female, and she died. So, like, it's not 100. Her rage isn't 100% directed against men in this movie, I would say.
Yeah, and I don't look at her actions as like revenge on behalf of women. I look at it as her who she is and what she's become is a result of this dominating masculine presence in her life, and that she was abused as a child. Like, just the culture of complete male domination throughout her entire life and throughout the entire culture has turned her into this person. So I think, yeah, she's not specifically targeting men, but she was created to be this way.
That is definitely true, yes. Although we could also place a little bit of the blame on her mother, because the guy who was abusing her as a child was, I guess he was maybe her ballet instructor, but also he was her stepfather.
Yeah. And
her mother definitely failed at protecting her from her stepfather, which is a shame.
Yeah, so Matt, Shannon, what do you guys think about this? Do you agree?
Go ahead, Shannon.
I mean, I would say I actually we're kind of getting into what I would like to get some more clarity on from discussion with you guys. I mentioned before, I feel like the bulk of the film, I definitely feel it was as a feminist film. One of the things I particularly appreciated is that we have our main character who is this totally patriarchal, condescending guy, and who wants ownership over a wife, with certain characteristics, and she should have a job, but like one of those jobs, like a dancer or artist or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it has that type of character who is nonetheless like comes across as really, really sympathetic. He's not a monster, and so it presents something that would generally be considered by a lot of people as something things that a bad person would say or believe, and put it in a character who is not a monster, and putting the audience in that position. So I really dug what was going on there. I guess the disconnect for me is, and I think Scott, you might be getting into what I'm trying to get to. I guess is her being like what she has become reflects what our main character Oyoma is doing. I'm not quite making the connection to her violence. So that's something I would like to hear more about, I guess.
So is the question sort of like, what has he done to deserve this?
Well, it's not so much him, but it's not a matter of deserving it, because I guess it's a tough thing to talk about, I guess.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting because you really don't feel like he deserves it, but at the end, I almost wonder if he feels like he deserves it.
Right.
Because he really did this to himself, because he's the one who decided to audition a bunch of women to be his wife, and then chose the one who happened to be a psycho killer.
Well,
so,
and I think, sorry to interrupt, Matt, but I think that the reason he chose her is kind of the same reason she is a psycho killer, in that what attracted him to this woman is that she was this damaged flower that he could protect and help recover and help save her, quote unquote. And I think that is saying something like the type of person he's attracted to, and the type of he wants to serve the traditional male role, and the only way he can do that is he likes this girl who is in desperate need of someone who's broken, who almost died when she got hurt, versus all these other women that they're auditioning seem relatively confident, seem to know who they are and what they want, but it's this quiet, reserved, broken one that he's attracted to.
Yeah,
I can argue against that just a little bit. I think she's broken, and he was able to see some of that in her, but I think he saw something, like he went through a big painful loss himself, and she has been through kind of a similar thing. I believe that's how he's looking at it. Like, she has dealt with grief just like he had to deal with grief when he lost his wife.
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation for sure. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah. So I think we're trying to circle around Shannon's question and trying to answer it, and I do think that it's a little ironic that we're four guys trying to answer this question about this really nuanced, difficult topic. But I think we're at least enlightened enough to recognize it and not to pretend like it doesn't exist. But yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated, and I think it's not meant to be completely clear. I mean, the ending is definitely meant to be kind of ambiguous, like Matt was touching on, that which part is the hallucination and which part is actually happening. Is kind of left open-ended and up to interpretations, and I think that's intentional. Well, I mean, it absolutely is intentional, but I think it to cause conversations like the ones we're happening to occur.
Yeah, just to write on that for a second. Not only do you kind of leave the movie uncertain, but the movie is playing with your state of belief about what's happening as it's going along. So, for example, there's a lengthy torture sequence where horrible things are done to the main character, and then he wakes up and he's back in the bed an hour ago into the movie, and he like goes and he splashes water on his face, and you get a good like 5 minutes or so of him being like sort of shaking off this horrifying nightmare, and at that point in the movie you're like, at least where my head was like, okay, so I see what they're doing here. So it was all a dream, and he's torturing himself mentally over the fact that he has done this audition thing, and on some level this is like really disturbing to him, that he's part of the same system that is oppressing, that oppressed this woman and caused her to be damaged in the first place. And then of course you realize that is a hallucination and he's actually still being tortured. But I still of course remember getting the impression of like, okay, so he's creating his own hell here. It's not actually happening in reality, and of course it's all a movie, so it's all not happening in reality. So the movie is just successfully injecting different ideas into your head at different levels, which is pretty awesome. I don't know if I've ever seen anything that does it quite that way, where the wakes up from a dream and then it was not actually a dream thing is played as anything other than just a gotcha moment. because this was definitely more than a gotcha moment. It was like you're thematically winding things together here by having him want this to be a dream, but also why would this be a dream for him? I guess. I'm rambling now.
Yeah, but I do love that, because I love the idea that he wakes up from this horrible nightmare of her torturing him, and then like goes, washes his face, freaks out, lays back down, and the woman who he just had this incredibly realistic, intense dream is laying next to him in bed, and she goes, "Yeah, I'll accept your marriage proposal." And he's like, "What proposal?" And she goes, "I'll accept it. Well, we're gonna get married now." And he's just like, "Okay," and then just goes to sleep. And then it's almost as if he's being punished for that, because he's just perpetuating the cycle that he's just having this nightmare about, and his punishment is, oh, you're just going to go back there. And I think it is, my landing is that the entire torture stuff is actually happening, and you're right that him waking up from the dream is just him wishing it was all a dream. But I love that the way it's set up, it's punishing him for, again, just perpetuating this cycle. Just like, here was his chance to make amends and say, look, the way I met you was inappropriate and wrong, and I manipulated your emotions and the emotions of a bunch of other women, but he just resigned to lay there and let it happen. And the movie punishes him for it.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that interpretation, because you're right. It basically, he goes back exactly the moment that it's obvious that he's just resigned to actually being with her.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about the actual torture scene a little bit, though, because this is disgusting and disturbing and terrible. But Paula, before we started recording, you told me something about how a lot of the torture porn type movies, the Hostel actually specifically, right? Eli Roth specifically said he was inspired by this movie to do Hostel. And I have a weird problem with that. And like, it's not that I just strictly dislike that type of film, but I feel like the grotesque torture in this movie is earned, which is weird to say, but it's like, it's necessary. It's necessary to the film, and it's not just gratuitous. It's thematically like purposeful. Like, even the fact that she's like stabbing him with little things is like she's now, like, it's a reversal of the typical male female dichotomy where now she's the one penetrating him. Like, it all feels very purposeful and thematically relevant, whereas movies like Hostel just seem like it's violent just for the sake, and disgusting just for the sake of being violent and disgusting. So it kind of bothers me that people looked at this movie and said, yes, I like that, and here I'm going to make a movie like Hostel, which is just showing disgusting things. Just do it.
Agreed. Yeah, we're all part of the Birth Movies Death community, and I remember once I got in trouble for referring to torture porn as torture porn, or for saying that, well, why don't we call it that? Because it describes a certain kind of thing. But apparently enthusiasts find that offensive.
Oh, really?
Which I think is kind of silly.
A bunch of people? Oops.
Yeah, kind of like, I don't know, some Star Trek fans don't like being called Trekkies, I guess, but I mean, who's really upset about that now? But yeah, it must be an example of somebody learning the wrong lesson from something, because obviously there is a similarity in that we are seeing some graphically depicted torture,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the whole point of the movie. Like, we definitely don't watch this movie just to see Aoyama get tortured, and if anything, the audience wants him not to be tortured. You want him to be okay.
Yeah.
So much different in that regard.
Yeah, as somebody who had seen it before and and generally knew what the film was about, I had that kind of like that kind of ominous feeling, because I knew where the movie was going, and I was dreading it. This is not the kind of movie where you're looking forward to, like, oh, what kind of gory set piece are we going to see?
Yeah, one thing about the torture porn that I noted was that, I mean, perhaps it seems ridiculous to say, but it was actually understated, because a lot of it is showing her face or showing his face and maybe showing her hands, but it's actually pretty sparing in the camera close up of needle inserted into flesh, camera close up of piano wire saw cutting into femur, or not femur, but shin or whatever. And that was interesting to me because like I think it would have been strictly worse if it had been just like consistent close-ups on these things, because I've always believed, or I think it's patently obvious actually, that like the way film and drama work is your empathic connection with the character. So by showing him like screaming and screaming, showing his face screaming and screaming as she's sawing his foot off, you're hurting the viewer a lot more than if you were showing the foot being cut off. Whereas I think in Hostel, they really, I haven't seen Hostel, so I'm going to make a completely baseless accusation, but movies like that, it's more like they'll just like put the camera on some horrible, violent act of bodily harm. And it's different.
The camera relishes it in those type of movies, and here the camera felt like it was disturbed and didn't want to show it. Like it kind of shied away at times when things were getting really graphic. I mean, maybe it's just how far we've come in 17 years, but I mean, there was an episode of The Walking Dead on Sunday where a guy gets stabbed in the stomach and his guts fall out and the guts are everywhere, and that's on television, and that's 10 times worse than anything we see here. I mean, this is absolutely disturbing and gross, but it doesn't relish in the gore.
Yeah, when his foot comes off, of course we have the sound effects and we have a few cut-ins that went up, but generally it's on her and it's on him, and then when it finally comes off, it cuts to a wide as she tosses it aside.
Right.
It doesn't linger at all.
Yeah.
The same thing when she decapitates the ballet instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't want to show the gore, and this could be just a combination of Japanese film board censorship, whatever, that they wouldn't allow extreme images like that. But it feels to me intentional and fitting with the film. So yeah, I mean, it's so weird to me that there were so many people that looked at this and said, we need to make more films like that, and the result was Hostel. That just feels crazy to me.
Well, it takes a lot more work to develop those characters and make you care about them than it does just to put some shocking imagery on screen, doesn't it?
That's true. That's absolutely
It would be kind of funny if Eli Roth watched this and decided to make a small-scale character drama.
There's something, I think, in my opinion, there's something intrinsically disturbing about violence that is not directly shown because your imagination fills things in. I remember being like a kid, I was like 12, and we were watching this documentary about the Maya civilization in school. So this was in school, mind you. And it was basically showing the bloodletting ceremonies that the Maya would do, where they would like stab themselves through the tongue or what have you. But they weren't showing it; they were showing it in like silhouette because it's a documentary and it has to be on TV, and can't show somebody stabbing something through their tongue. And I almost threw up in the classroom. And this always stuck with me because it's like, well, why should that affect me so much? Because like now I can watch pretty much whatever. But this movie kind of reminded me of that because it's like, well, this movie made me very uncomfortable, whereas watching like Alien Chestbursters doesn't. And I think that's actually because it's making you use your imagination, which is way more disturbing.
Yeah, your head is way more fucked up than this movie.
Yeah.
No, I think I agree with you. I think, I mean, it's not to say that I haven't like watched all the torture porn movies we're talking about. I've watched multiple of the Hostel movies, and even as I say they're disgusting, there's something in there. But I agree that it is so much more effective when you're wondering in your head exactly what that is looking like, and when it cuts away to just an image of a face, and you're just seeing facial reactions and hearing noises, I'd agree that's so much more effective than just sticking a camera right into something and letting us see it. I think it works so well in this movie, and you're right, it was more disgusting than some of these these films I've seen that do exactly that. Just stick the camera in it. Like the Evil Dead remake pops into my head, where that movie just wanted to show you everything as explicitly disgusting as possible. And I found this infinitely more effective.
And speaking of how effective the torture scene is, it plays on a lot of different primal fears that most people can probably appreciate, because you've got being stuck by needles, acupuncture needles. A lot of people don't like that. But also, poor Aoyama, he's been drugged and he can't move. So
yeah.
And how many of us have had nightmares where something bad is happening and we either can barely move or we just can't move?
Yeah. Yeah, and it again, that works so much with the themes too, because he is a guy that's so used to being in power and in control. I mean, he waits like 4 days before he calls her, and that's really almost entirely out of just him asserting his control. And this poor girl waits by the phone nonstop for 4 days, waiting for his call. But yeah, he's completely powerless, and that works so perfectly.
Yeah, and then also the fear of violence toward his son, which is one of those things where, like, it's bad enough, and then the movie ramps it up by having the son come home, and it just literally ratchets up the tension in your chest, because you're like, oh no, not the son too, because you love his relationship with the son at that point, and you don't want anything to happen to him. I mean, I think it's amazing how much you actually care about this side character.
Yeah. So what did you guys think of? I mean, the hallucination he has immediately after being drugged reveals so much about this movie. Like we learn why that his assistant was kind of weird around him the entire time. We learn like how kind of disgusting his mind is, because he is imagining his son's the girl his son's with. But we also learn who's in the bag in this hallucination, which is a pretty substantial reveal. So I mean, is by putting that in the hallucination, is the movie explicitly declaring that that's what was actually in the bag, or is this just his like mind playing tricks on him, or what did you guys interpret that as?
I say that yes, that was real. Like, a lot of what we see in the hallucination is real, and it's just things that they couldn't show us earlier without kind of spoiling it. So like the torture kind of brings about this great realization in the viewers of just things that we didn't understand about the situation before, and now we do, including who is in the bag, which is, I believe, Shimada, the record producer that she used as a reference.
And it all makes sense, like, because the bag is real, because we saw her sitting by the phone and we saw the bag move.
Right.
So we know there's a bag with a person in it, and we know there was an extra ear, tongue, and 4 fingers at the murder scene. So it could. I mean, I guess that's true. I guess it's just he's putting this together in his head. And yeah, it's a hallucination, and he doesn't actually see this thing that he imagines seeing. But you're supposed to just figure, like, yeah, that's correct. That's what's going on here. I that honestly.
Yeah, I before we started recording, I did a little bit of poking around and read some takes on this film online, and a couple people basically saying that their interpretation is that he's drugged, and that she's, I don't know, talking to him while he's drugged, and he's imagining it based on what she's saying, which seems like it's way too much of a literalist. Like, you're trying to explain this too much.
Yeah, I could. Yeah.
What I think what its aim is, it's to get across something that's true in a more abstract way. I don't think it needs to be, completely literally explained in that sort of way, and I think it works fine the way it does.
Yeah, and I agree, and to me that's using film to its full effect, right? Like, not everything in movies has to be a literal, exact interpretation of something. There's room for kind of nebulous weirdness like this, but if it still gets the theme and the point of the movie across, then it's functional within the world of the movie. And I agree with your interpretation. Everyone seems to be kind of on the same page with that one. and I agree. I just thought I'd pose the question and see what you guys thought. So is there anything else any of you guys specifically wanted to talk through in this film? I'm trying to go through my notes, which are mostly just me writing what the hell is happening over and over again.
I guess I just kind of wanted to, I mean, practically none of us have said anything actually critical of the movie. And I wanted to say, I felt like, I don't know if the ballet teacher added anything to the movie that wouldn't have been implicit in kind of her character's statements and actions without him actually being in the movie. Pretty much every scene with the ballet teacher, like I felt like he was kind of a cartoonish character to be in a movie that is otherwise very like, I just felt like it was a tonal clash, and it was like the actor was kind of hamming it up a little too much, and I was like, I just wish that whole element weren't in there, and then it would just be a tiny bit tighter.
I kind of agree with you there. That character stands out a lot to me, and the specific depictions of his abuse, it seems almost like kind of purient in a way that doesn't seem in character for the film.
Right.
And also, it kind of left me a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of, I mean, obviously she's been talking about, like the fact that she was abused and had a horrible childhood and whatnot, and that's, and that can be part of like how she becomes who she is, but it leaves some of it to the imagination, where with this ballet instructor, it becomes more like, okay, she was sexually abused as a child, therefore she became a monster, which is, it feels off to me, and I think that's part of what kind of mixed up my view of the thematic stuff in the film. Like I'm glad that you brought that up, because I really do think that character by itself really did throw things off for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. That if he weren't there, then the abuse would just be a question mark that you could fill in with your imagination, which would probably be worse. So, yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I think so much of the movie is kind of left open and is not explicit, that making that very explicitly shown as complete true and factual, and not having any kind of nuance to it. I think, yeah, I mean, I agree that I think the movie could probably be a little tightened up. I think it's 2 hours long. And while I appreciate the very kind of slow moving first half, and I say slow moving, I don't mean that negatively, because I think it does kind of lull you into this false sense. But if I was looking for places to nitpick, yeah, I would say that the movie maybe could have been shortened up by 15 minutes.
I could talk a little bit about the ballet teacher.
Yeah,
I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but this is based on a novel. So, and that novel was translated into English in 2009, probably because the movie was so popular. So, kind of have an unfair advantage as far as knowing what the original author said, which is a little bit different from the movie, but like they're so close that it kind of gives us some insights. But the role the ballet teacher serves in the movie, I guess he's just supposed to be really unnerving, although I think, like you said, he ends up being a little bit hammy to us. I don't know if that's because we're not Japanese, whether they would have seen him as the same way or not.
Yeah, that might just be cultural, yeah.
Yeah, but in the book, we didn't spend nearly as much time with him if he was... I mean, like, we know that she was abused, and in fact, she was actually abused by... Was it her mother or another... There was some lady who actually abused her too, which makes it a little bit less feminist. But instead of, basically when we see the ballet teacher, we're like, whoa, this is really weird. And it's just kind of foreshadowing, just like the guy in the bag, really. And in the movie and the book have a thing about people losing their feet, right? That's this weird recurring imagery. And there was a guy that she met, they were at dinner, Aoyama and Asami, and just in the background, this guy in a wheelchair like saw her and kind of tried to stand up, and he was freaking out about it. and Aoyama didn't even really notice it. But basically, he was a former victim, and that's about as much as you see. So I guess they took that and just rolled it into the ballet teacher as far as like letting us know that there's somebody else whose feet she's taken before, perhaps. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe I guess they could have dialed it up too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to think. Like, I understand like the narrative person of showing him as missing his feet is important because that ties into what she does later. But I'm trying to think if there's a way they could have done that without having his character. Like maybe because they already say there's extra body parts found in the bar, right? So maybe they find some feet too. I don't think they ever specifically said that they found extra feet or anything. I think it was just tongue, fingers, and ear. I thought.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. It's
and she didn't even take the feet of the guy in the bag, did she? So that's.
I thought she did.
Yeah, she did.
She did. Oh, okay. They're just not. Okay. Well.
And in fact, when you see the wheelchair guy, it's supposed to be the guy in the bag's feet have been attached to wheelchair guy's legs.
Oh wow, I did not pick up on that at all.
Interesting.
Oh wow! I thought they were just really, really weird prosthetics. Okay.
That's interesting.
That's why they're so weird.
What is the timeline for when she was supposed to have actually killed the ballet dancer? Because the scene we see is he's his old self. So was that supposed to have happened just like in current time in the film, or like his? I didn't fully track that.
Well, I could say in the book, between their, they go off and have like kind of a fight or something weird happens when Aoyama and Asami are on a little vacation together, right? Mm-hmm. They have something weird happens, and then Aoyama spends a certain amount of time looking for her before she re-enters the story. Well, in the movie, it seems like kind of a short amount of time, but I think in the book it's supposed to be like 2 months or something. But I believe that during that time, when she's disappeared, at some point she goes ahead and kills the ballet instructor.
Gotcha.
What about the timeline of their relationship? As near as I could tell, we only saw 2 dates, right? And
yeah.
And then after that, he tells his son he wants to propose to her. So I'm not sure whether there's more time passed than is strictly obvious, or whether whether that's supposed to be strange, that he immediately jumps to that, or whether that's a cultural thing that I'm not aware of. Or
well, time is kind of weird in this whole movie because I agree we saw like 2 dates, but there's also that when they meet the second time, like. The transitions in this movie are really kind of abrupt, where like they're having one conversation in front of one table and the conversation picks up again almost as if from the same point, but suddenly they're in a different restaurant eating a nicer dinner. And I don't know if that's meant to show passage of time or a different date or growth in the relationship, or it's just, I mean, they do weird transitions like all the time. Like I wrote down, and I can't even remember exactly what it was, but I wrote down after the first time they had sex, the transition scene there was really great, and I don't even remember what it was now. I just underlined a great transition, but
well, I think that he jumps into bed and the sheets roll around a bit, and we see near the foot of the bed, and then the camera moves up, and they're lying there.
Oh yeah, that was it.
Fact.
Yeah, see how it handles
it was an in-camera transition,
right? How it handles passage of time via the transitions is really interesting and not quite clear. So I think it might have been longer than we're shown on face value.
Yeah,
I think so as well.
Yeah, my sense was that a lot of time had actually passed, but that the movie was also trying to make you uncertain, and maybe that's all part of the horror element of making you feel a little bit unmoored and disconnected and just slightly uncomfortable, basically. Because I definitely remember that scene where they're in the restaurant and then they're having suddenly the same conversation but in a different restaurant, and my brain was like really confused for a second, and it was like remarkably so. I was like, what? and that to me, if you're making a horror movie, that's exactly the kind of like radical uncertainty that you're trying to inject into your viewers, maybe.
Yeah. The other weird moment, and I'm just thinking about this now, like I think it's in the same scene where we see the bag move for the first time, when she's sitting there waiting for the phone, and she kind of moves her head, and like you see her backbone, and like she moves her head, and it's like almost 90 degrees, and you see like every vertebrae on her on her bone. Like again, I came into this movie knowing it was going to go horror, but not knowing the exact nature of it. So I'm waiting for this woman to like, and kind of to turn like into a monster or something. So like it's this really weird movement she does, and I don't even know if you guys remember it, but it was just very, very unsettling for me, and it all adds up to just this air of uncomfortableness. And like you kind of want to push it away because you're like, no, like why this shouldn't be weird, but like it's almost the same thing as his best friend says, that there's just something that he doesn't trust about what's going on.
You know, setting aside all the feminist themes and you know the fact that it's definitely saying a lot of things specifically about patriarchy. This is probably the best movie I've ever seen just about the topic of like a creepy psycho person being in your life and you not realizing they're a creepy psycho person. Because I mean, and I think that's a very like natural human fear is that, you know, your friend or someone close to you is actually like a serial killer or just basically a monster, and that they just have a mask all the time. And this movie does that really well because it barely hints to you that that's her nature. And then it shows, you know, she's acting like pretty convincingly normally whenever she's around him. So just really plays on that particular fear.
Is there an interpretation of this movie in which we see this as male paranoia towards a woman scorned type of thing?
Yeah.
So, like, I remember specifically Gone Girl. I had a whole bunch of people that I talked to after that movie came out that were like, this movie made me terrified of women. And I think that's the complete wrong reading of Gone Girl. And I think it's the wrong reading of this film as well. But could you see why someone would reach that interpretation?
I can, but I don't think that's what it's going for. Like it's more like the man is trying to open himself up and be vulnerable, and he's opening himself up to, you know, a snake, and that's what's scary about it to me. It's not so much like, oh, women are bad. It's like that's not. I don't see the movie saying that, and the movie has other women characters who are not that way. So I don't know. Somebody else go.
Well, actually, I was going to say that there really aren't that many women characters other than her. I mean, we have the secretary who has that very strange relationship with him, who obviously once is digging on him. And then there's the deceased wife, who obviously doesn't have any real lines other than that hallucination. Is there anybody else?
The housekeeper and Shige's
right,
female friend.
That's right. Okay, yeah. Right.
But every single one of them serves as some sort of subservient role to him.
Yeah.
Is the housekeeper also digging on him, or am I misinterpreting that?
No, she's just friendly, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought I don't know. I'm kind of halfway
went
between.
back and forth on that.
Yeah.
Because she says like, oh, you have a girlfriend, and then he, you know, gives a kind of cryptic reaction, and then her reaction to that is like she's taken aback, rather than
And also saying that every man needs a woman, or something to that effect.
Oh yeah.
Men are you know, hopeless without women or something. There's a lot of dialogue like that. There's a lot of offhand, you know, language like that coming from both men and women, where there's all these attitudes about gender roles that are implicit in everything they're saying.
Yeah, and just about like loneliness too. Like several times, like I remember that one scene at the beginning when they're looking at the footage of the people at the concert, and it was like only sad, lonely people would behave like this because only sad, lonely people would go to concert. And then like there's this awkward line about like all Japanese people are lonely.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up actually, because like that combined with when he's meeting his buddy at the bar, and they commiserate over the state of Japan, and this is early on in the film, and so I'm wondering how, like, if there's some broader Japanese cultural commentary going on here that might not exactly be apparent to us, with that the loneliness mentions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, Paul, you might be better at interpret. Like to me, like this movie feels like it was made very specifically for a Japanese audience, and I think it's a testament to the quality of the film that someone who is not as familiar with their culture as myself can still pick up on a lot of the themes and nuances of the film. But I think there is stuff hidden in here that might not resonate as well for us because we're not as familiar with the culture.
Yeah, there is definitely some cultural commentary going on. And in fact, in the book, it goes on for pages. Like it can be, a little uninteresting at times. But, they did a good job of tightening that up and just making it, short little phrases and lines instead of, I don't know, overloading the film with it, thankfully.
I will say, now that we talked about the bar scene, something else I wanted to bring up. Again, talking about the framing and the cinematography. That whole scene, there are women in the frame constantly, but they're always like in the corners and out of focus, and like so they're there, but we look past them at the men constantly. I think that's so well done, and it's so subtle, but obviously, like to me, absolutely intentional. Like that's, you put the camera there, like, and there's the beginning of this movie has very few cuts. Like it usually puts the camera in a place, establishes it, and holds it there, and you see an entire conversation back and forth without the camera moving or cutting at all. But when it does cut, it tends to stay where it's cut, even if there's a person in the frame. And if it's a woman, it remains in the frame, but never in focus. And I think that's so well done.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't notice that consciously, but now I'm scanning my memory, and I'm seeing that.
Good
Yeah,
observation.
I didn't notice the gender aspect there, but I did love the extended, wide shots. I always love it when filmmakers do that.
Yeah, and like I think too often we say things like static camera, and it comes off as being negative. I don't think not moving your camera very much is negative at all. And
Not at all. Oh.
And it works so well here. And like I said, it works well in just that the composite, the scene itself is beautiful to look at, but it works well as a clear delineation between the two halves of this movie, or 3/4 and 1/4, depending on where you call that change. But yeah, it's just such great camera work. I love it.
Yeah, that was a really good shot.
All right, so is there anything else? I think we've been overwhelmingly positive about this, but is there, like, I know Shannon, you said you had some issues with the film, and I think we touched on some of them, but is there anything else you wanted to explicitly bring up?
No, not necessarily. I think that, as we've talked more about it, and we've talked more about some of the ambiguity that's just, designed into the film, I think like actually through the conversation, it has fallen into place a bit more. And I definitely need to see it again in the light of our conversation here. But I can, thinking back at it at this point, it does feel like more of a whole than my first impression. So, but yeah, I thought it was. I think it's a great movie, for sure.
Cool. So if there's nothing else, I think we're ready to vote.
Oh, just one more thing.
No, go for it.
Go ahead.
Both of you go.
You first.
It's just one of the notes I made, and it's one of my favorite lines in the movie. The very beginning, as they're talking about the fish that they caught that they're eating, there's a line and about the shifting gender of the fish. Ioma says, "I don't know much about ovaries," Which like that was this great setting up for like what was to come later, So anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
Well, that's
So
hilarious
true.
because I was actually just going to mention the fish and how the movie semi opens with him and his son fishing, and he makes some comment about like, oh, I'm waiting for the big ones or something, or I'm only interested in the big ones. I think it's something like I'm only interested in the big ones, and then he catches the fish, and it's like, wow, I get it. This is a metaphor for the whole audition process where he's going through all these women, and then he quote snags the big one with the violent image of a hook, and then the fish gets revenge on him.
Yeah, and that's so I completely forgot, but I did write down the dual gender nature of the fish. And I think that goes into the theme of it's kind of trying to show like we put all this importance on gender and how it defines culture and society, but there's this fish that just decides what it wants to be later. It obviously is just not as important. And maybe that's the film saying we put so much into this and it's not that important. It's a great way to start your movie because it's exactly one of those things you think back on after you finish it and you're like, oh yeah, absolutely, I can see what they were doing from the start.
Nice.
Paul, what did you have to say?
Well, I wanted to ask everybody. Obviously, Asami turns on Aoyama. She's very sweet on him for a time. Then after they go on their little vacation together and they sleep together, suddenly she disappears, and at that point she has turned on him. I just wanted to ask you guys what you thought could be the reason for her turning on him.
I kind of think that, to me, it felt like she was kind of testing him, and by like agreeing to just sleep with her like that, he kind of failed the test. I think she obviously had expectations of the relationship that were frankly impossible to meet up to. Like it's not even that he had a picture of his dead wife, but just his love for his son was too much for her to share. But that scene was so unusual, and like she completely takes charge of the situation and like takes all her clothes off and shows him her body. And I guess that'd be my interpretation, that she was testing him and he failed. So she was just really disappointed.
Anybody else?
I like that interpretation, and mine was, I suppose, similar enough that it's barely worth elaborating. It's just like she set him up to fail. She wanted this. She wanted to be able to take this out on him on some level. Like there was no way this was going to go well. There was no way that they were going to be together and happy and like live domestically together. She's like a monster basically, and I don't know. I just don't buy that. That's like, well, that's not a feminist reading, because you can't say the woman is a monster. It's like, well, there's plenty of feminist readings where it's the system that is broken, and the system can make women into monsters and men into monsters, and it's still, the point is to address the problems with the system. It's not to pretend that one gender is infallible. So I think she's a movie monster, so this was always going to happen. That's it.
Shannon?
Yeah, I'm basically on the same page there. Yeah.
Okay, well, I would like to, let's look at the dialogue she said during that scene, because before she'll actually sleep with him, she basically makes him promise to love her and only her, right?
Which we didn't realize which he didn't realize was completely literal.
Right.
Like,
Right.
Yes.
not just among women, but among anything ever.
Right.
Yeah, which is really not fair. And she even says, Matt said she was setting him up for failure. Well, she even says how everyone ends up disappointing her on this score. And it turns out because she's so unreasonable, so strict about how little love they can have for anybody else. And yeah, so having read the book, well, the book, you might be disappointed. If you like the ambiguity of the movie, then you might be disappointed that the author just lays it out there exactly what happened. And and you don't have to say, well, you don't have to agree that it happened in the movie, but basically after they slept together, or at least sometime during that weekend, he finally revealed that he had a son, Shigehiko, because he never even, we never see him talking about his son to her, right? Like, she's not very inquisitive about his personal life. And so that's the missing puzzle piece to me, is that he finally, admits that he has a son, and that's too much for her because she already made him promise that she wasn't going to love anybody else.
That's definitely interesting, and I was wondering why he never appeared to mention his son to her. But the movie definitely shows she, seduces him and then leaves in the middle of the night. So where exactly the change happened? Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe the movie's trying to say something different, but that's still an interesting shading to add in.
Yeah, and also remember, he woke up in like a really dazed state. Like, so it's only implied, but she had already drugged him at that point. Like that's the first example of her drugging somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it never explicitly even says that they have sex. Like, it's heavily implied, but it's possible that maybe they didn't.
Yeah, maybe that was not a transition.
Yeah, maybe he just passed out.
Yeah, that's true.
No, a lot of stuff could have happened that we just didn't see, right?
Yeah. But I think Matt was probably the best answer in that, like, he was always going to fail. Like, I don't know if the details matter so much, but it was just never going to happen. Like, there's no way. Cool.
Very true.
Well, Paul, do you want to do a last closing statement before we move on to the vote?
Okay, well, we talked a lot about the themes. And by the way, I kind of maybe unsuccessfully argued against the film being feminist. I didn't want it to come across that way. It is a feminist movie, so please don't think that I'm opposed to feminism or that I can't see it.
No angry emails, please.
Yeah, definitely not. But also another theme that, like, we just briefly mentioned, but a theme that I think resonates to me, at least, is just how different people deal with loss or tragedy, like how different people deal with tragedy. Because you have Aoyama talks about it, he talks about how impressed he is with how she deals with tragedy, and then he kind of, he says his own thing about how he thinks people have to be able to move on, and so he has kind of maybe a better approach to dealing with tragedy than we see her approach, which unfortunately was to turn into a really messed up individual. And then finally, when the movie ends, we can see that he is once again going to have to deal with tragedy. So he's going to have to put his own lesson to work. And I thought that was pretty cool how it came around like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so I think we can all agree that it is a well-shot movie. I mean, especially for this particular director, because he makes just so many movies, and a lot of them, they definitely can be really bizarre, but like, few of them are so thematically resonant, in my opinion. Like, most of them are much more surface level stuff. But, perhaps because he was adapting a book and all that, he did, we see a lot of beautiful imagery. We see a lot of themes, some nice ambiguity that, again, wasn't even there mostly in the source material. So, that's been inserted by the script writer and the director. And probably I hope everybody liked the performances as well. And Asami herself, the villain of the movie, as it were, she's played by a lady who had done at most one other movie at that time, and she's actually really a model. So she has kind of a nice alien quality. She has a really unique appearance, and I just thought she was believable as a weird but interesting person that you could fall in love with, and then definitely believable as a monster towards the end. So, I hope this movie, I hope the messages and the delivery will resonate throughout time.
Cool. All right. Let's do it. Let's vote. So Shannon, let's start with you. What yes or no on Audition being entered into the Kryptonian collection?
Well, as you may have gathered, coming into the into the episode. I wasn't sure which way I wanted to go on this, just because I wasn't the film hadn't quite gelled in my mind. But really, after a discussion, I'm gonna have to say yes. I think Audition is a really, really excellent movie.
Awesome. Matt, how about you?
I'm also going to vote yes, and I'm a bit surprised also because I had not, I had heard about this movie for a long time, but I had not heard that it was like a really good film. I'd heard that it was like, oh, this is one of those disturbing Japanese movies that is famous for being disturbing and weird, and when I heard that we were watching it, I kind of groaned inwardly because I was like, oh, this is just going to be violent, and I don't see what possible redeeming value. So anyway, I'm glad to have been corrected, and voting yes.
Yeah, maybe I not that my vote matters now, but maybe I shouldn't be this honest, but I kind of went into this month thinking in the back of my head that I have been too positive. So unless this next movie really knocks my socks off, I'm going to set out to vote no on the movie. And then I watched this movie and was like, damn, this movie really knocked my socks off. Like, and I left the movie feeling positive about it, and my positivity only grew over the next 24 hours as I thought about it more. And it's even grown even more just sitting down and talking to you guys about it. So it's an absolute yes for me. I love the idea of this movie being in the collection. This is kind of, Matt, when you and I sat down to envision what this thing could be, this is kind of the exact kind of movie I wanted in, something that regular people that may have not followed cinema very closly would never have heard of. I mean, I certainly consider myself a cinephile, and I had not really heard much about this movie. So I love the idea of it being in the collection. So I'm very excited that everyone else agreed. And I'm really happy for Paul for nominating it. This was great. It was really great.
Yeah,
thanks. That's awesome. I was just, when we picked the movie, I was really looking forward to seeing how you guys liked it, and you all liked it, and that's just terrific. That's sweet.
Yeah, so Audition is in the Kryptonian collection. That's awesome.
Yay!
So that means Shannon, you're out.
Boo!
Oh no!
and Paul, you're in. So
what have I done?
So next month, Paul will join us to discuss whatever movie we're dealing with that month, and I'm excited to have you on board. This was a lot of fun. Shannon, thanks again for you coming in, and it was great to have your viewpoint. That's why I love the idea of this rotating third chair so much, because I think having you come in, and then I'm not only defending your movie, but then also getting to weigh in on someone else's movie, I think is great. So
yeah, this is a ball. Thank you for having me back on and inviting me in the first place.
Of course. So so Paul will be back next month. I don't know who our guest is going to be yet. I don't know what movie we're going to do yet, because we've got a month from now. But I'm very excited to see what it is, and I think this is going pretty great. Before we get out of here, Paul, why don't you plug yourself? Talk about what you do on the internet and where you can be found and all that good stuff.
Sure, why not? I forgot to say this was my first podcast, so I'm still learning. So just thank you, everybody, for your patience. But I am an established gaming journalist. I write for a site called Windows Central, windowscentral.com. And I do, weekly live streams of different games on Saturdays. And you can follow me on Twitter at Paul R. Acevedo.
Awesome. We will have that website link in your Twitter in the show notes for those out there that want to follow Paul. I haven't gotten to sit in on one of your live streams yet, but I promise I will one day. Just busy with wedding stuff on the weekends, but and Shannon, where can you be found on the internet? Plug yourself.
Well, I am a contributor and editor at Luton Bus. It's a film criticism site, although we branch out also into game and music every now and then. That's at lutonbus.net, LEWTONBUS.net. And Scott, you've contributed.
I did.
Which is awesome.
I wrote an Arrival review. I loved it.
which was excellent.
Thank you.
And I'm on Twitter as Brundlefly, at Brundlefly, BRUNDLEFLY.
Awesome. And both those will also be in the show notes. And Matt, where are you?
I can be found on Twitter at Mordinamail, and I write articles for dailyplanetfilms.com. Probably going to be starting a review about Moana soon.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yes.
Sweet.
It's a good movie.
I am also on Twitter at ScottDaily85. That's DALY. You can find more information about Daily Planet Films at Daily Planet Films on Twitter or dailyplanetfilms.com. And next week, Matt, we're doing our Christmas edition of Phantom Zone. So Adrian's going to be back with another terrible movie for us that we have to watch and talk about. This month, I believe it's the Christmas horror film Elves.
Yes.
So I haven't watched it yet, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'll watch it with my children.
Oh yeah, that's probably a good call.
Just kidding.
Can't wait to hear that.
All right, so Paul, thanks again for coming on, Shannon as well, and for everyone else out there, we will see you next week.
The podcast is over, it's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school, maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday.